They were nobodies, just two poor girls with torn shoes and voices that had never been heard outside the attic. Everyone laughed when their names were announced on stage, but no one was prepared for what happened after the first E. Note, this is a story about the pain of being underestimated, the courage born in silence, and two young hearts who spoke wonder from the darkest of places. A chilly October wind seeps through the cracks in the old wood of a small house on the outskirts of Millfield, Ohio. The building is rickety, the paint is peeling, and the tin roof creaks with every gust of wind. But behind the crumbling walls, there is a warmth that cannot be measured in money. Sarah and Sophie Blake, 13-year-old twins, sit side by side on a dusty attic floor, wrapped in old blankets they found in the garage. There is no heater, no Wi-Fi, no soft mattress. But they do have one thing: a voice. In Sophie's hands is an old cassette player inherited from her mother. Inside, an old cassette tape with a worn label that reads, "Mom, Sunday Choir Solo." They listen to it over and over again, trying to imitate every vibrato, every emotion, every pause in the song. "We never hear Mom's voice live," Sarah whispers, "but every time she sings on this tape, it's like she's sitting here," Sophie said, staring up at the leaky ceiling. Their father, Ethan Blake, a night truck driver, had just left for work. He usually came home around dawn, his eyes puffy and his hands calloused. He didn't say much, but he always kissed their foreheads before going to bed. At school, they barely existed. Their clothes were often too shabby. They always sat in the corner of the classroom, encouraging each other with little notes in their notebooks. No friends, no birthday invitations, just each other. But at night, the attic became another world. A place where they could sing softly but clearly, free from ridicule, free from a world that had never given them space. At the end of the night, after singing an old song called Amazing Grace, Sophie hugged Sarah from the side. "Your voice gave me goosebumps, you too. We're like one voice," Sarah whispered. "But only here," she continued, "only here is safe." The attic was their little secret, a place where they became more than just poor girls, a place where they became who they really were when they didn't know it yet, that the voices from behind these old walls would soon shake the world that had turned a deaf ear. Millfield nights are always quiet, except for the gentle breeze and the rustling of leaves. In the small attic, Sarah and Sophie sit facing each other again, the old cassette player spinning between them. Sophie holds the cassette. They've heard so many times, this time with wetter eyes than usual. Her mother's song plays softly, bringing back memories they can no longer hold. "Mother used to say that a voice is a gift," Sophie says softly. "But why do we have to hide our voices? Don't other people want to hear them?" Sarah looks down, holding her sister's hand. "Because our voices are different. They'd laugh if we sang at school. Since their mother died 3 years ago, their voices have been their bridge to the past, and also their only way of feeling close to the person they've lost. At school, they're shadows that always elude them. Their voices only come out in whispers or soft songs at home, away from the cynical eyes of their friends." But that night, a determination began to grow slowly in their hearts. A small whisper that said, "Maybe someday this voice will be heard by someone else." Outside, the wind was getting stronger, buffeting the old, fragile-looking house. But inside, the two small voices slowly merged, creating a powerful harmony even behind crumbling walls. And behind those voices, there was a wordless promise they would find a way to shine even if the world said no. The morning sun shone brightly over the Millfield Middle School courtyard, but Sarah and Sophie were in a far less cheerful mood. They walked slowly to class, hiding their faces behind the collars of their worn jackets. "I heard there's a talent show at school next week," Sophie whispered softly, afraid of being overheard. Sarah nodded, looking at the ground. "We've never been to something like this before. We'll probably just be the laughing stock." But word quickly spread. During recess, they heard loud laughter coming from a table of popular students, especially from Chloe Sanders, the most popular girl and also the most ruthless bully. "Hey, those poor twins, come sing at the school event. I want to see you guys be clowns," Chloe taunted, her voice cutting. Her friends laughed and pointed at Sarah and Sophie. Some of the other students followed suit, calling them trailer park girls and sleazy cassette girls. Sarah and Sophie looked at each other, their chests pounding and tears threatening to fall. But there was something in their hearts that refused to give up. That night, in the attic of the old house, the two of them had a discussion. "If they just want to laugh, let them," Sarah said in a low but firm voice. "If we sing, everyone will be quiet, and that's better than not being heard at all." Sophie gripped her sister's hand tightly. "I'm scared, but I want to try." They both knew this wasn't just about their voices, but about proving that they were worthy of being heard. Meanwhile, in another corner of the city, Ethan came home from work, unaware that that night, his twin daughters' voices might rock their little world. The day of the talent show announcement at Millfield Middle School arrived. In the simple school hall, students gathered with excitement and also small whispers. Sarah and Sophie sat in the back row, their hands clasped tightly, hearts pounding. When their turn was called, the sound of whispers and small laughter from several students rang loudly in their ears. Chloe and her friends looked ready with cynical expressions, as if waiting for the twins to fail. However, Ethan, their father, who happened to come as a school volunteer, stared at his two daughters with full confidence from the corner of the room. Sarah and Sophie stood on a simple wooden stage, the spotlight shining brightly on them. With a trembling voice, Sophie opened her mouth and began to sing. The first note that came out was so clear, so sincere, that the entire room fell silent. Sarah followed with a melodious and harmonious voice, making every second full of magic. Their soft yet strong voices turned laughter and ridicule into fascination and silence. Chloe looked down, unable to believe what she had just heard. Her friends looked at each other, speechless. In the audience, Ethan held back tears, filled with "Pretty that night." The voice from behind the old wall was not only heard, it echoed through the hearts of those present. The final sounds of Sophie and Sarah's song echoed through the halls of Millfield School. A strange silence enveloped the room. None of the students or teachers dared to disregard the voices with their usual jokes or taunts. Everyone was silent, stunned by the incredible harmony of the two girls who had always been considered insignificant. Sarah held the microphone with trembling hands, her eyes staring straight ahead, but her heart soaring with pride. Sophie, standing beside her, closed her eyes and let her soft voice flow without restraint, as if singing not just to the room, but to the entire world that had turned a deaf ear. When they finished the song, the silence was broken by a wave of applause that came slowly, then became a roar. Several students clapped enthusiastically. Faces that had previously been cynical turned to those filled with awe and respect. Amidst the applause, several children who usually avoided them now approached curiously. "Your voices are amazing," said a boy who always sat far away from them. "I never knew you guys could sing so well," added a girl who usually followed Chloe. Chloe herself, who had been laughing earlier, stood there, speechless. Her eyes were glassy, and her face softened a bit. Bowing her head, she walked away without saying a word. Sarah and Sophie exchanged glances. A shy but proud smile etched on their faces. After being the butt of ridicule and neglect for so long, they now stood on stage with confidence. But behind the excitement, Ethan Blake stood in the corner of the room. His tired eyes were glassy, looking at his twin daughters with immense pride. He knew their struggle had only just begun. "This is just the beginning," he murmured softly. That night, back in the attic of their old house, Sarah and Sophie sat side by side, still wearing their simple stage outfits. The clamorous voices of the school hall still rang in their ears, but now there was something different. The voices carried hope. Sophie broke the silence. "We don't just want to sing for ourselves anymore, do we?" Sarah nodded firmly. "We have to show everyone that our voices matter." They then pulled an old cassette player out of their bag, playing their mother's recording. This time, the voice was not just a sad memory, but a source of new strength. Ethan entered the attic, carrying hot coffee for them. "I'm proud of you. Remember, your voices are a gift, not something you should hide." Sarah looked at her father. "We promise we will keep fighting." Outside, the night wind blew hard, as if welcoming a new chapter in the lives of the little family. Although there were still many challenges waiting, the silence that lingered after the performance had opened the door of hope that had been tightly closed, and the two sisters' voices were no longer just whispers in the dark. Their voices were ready to echo, breaking through the boundaries of silence and fear. In the weeks following their heart-pounding talent show performance, the atmosphere at Millfield Middle School has begun to change. Sarah and Sophie are no longer the poor girls in the corner, but rather figures who are starting to be respected and taken into consideration. They even start getting invitations to sit with their classmates in the cafeteria. But behind the smiles and compliments, an old shadow is starting to resurface, a past that never really went away. On a sunny afternoon, as they walk home from school, a local newspaper is clutched tightly in the hands of a strange man waiting outside their door. Ethan, who has come home early, senses something is off. The man introduces himself as a reporter from the Millfield Times and says he wants to interview the Blake family for an article about gifted children in small towns. Ethan is skeptical, but Sarah and Sophie feel this could be an opportunity to raise their voices even further. But not everyone welcomes the news with open arms. The next day at school, Chloe Sanders returns with a sneer. "So you think you can be famous just because of a song on a talent show? Don't get too big-headed, you cheap twins," she taunted, greeted by laughter from some of the students. Sarah and Sophie tried to ignore it, but the comment scratched old wounds in their hearts. That night, in the attic that witnessed their journey, Sarah said softly, "Why can't they let us move forward?" Sophie held her sister's hand. "Maybe they're afraid we'll change, or maybe they're afraid our voices are stronger than theirs." Ethan, who overheard the conversation, sat near them, looking at his two daughters with determination. "The world is indeed harsh, children, but your voices are a power that no one can take away. Don't let those old shadows silence you." The next day, news about Sarah and Sophie appeared in the local newspaper, complete with a photo of them standing on the school stage. Many admired them, but negative comments also began to appear on social media. A new obstacle had arrived, bigger and more complicated than just the teasing at school. Sarah and Sophie knew they had to be stronger than before. And Ethan is determined to protect and support them, no matter what. Amidst all the trials, one thing remains clear. Theirs are not just voices. They are voices of the heart that will continue to echo, even as old shadows try to cover them. That night, the small Blake family home was filled with a heavy silence. The lights in the attic that were usually warm and full of songs were now dimmed, as if feeling the weight that enveloped them. Sarah and Sophie sat side by side, on the floor, their eyes red and glassy. The letters and mean comments they received on social media bubbled up in their minds like a relentless storm. The hurtful words cut deeper than the taunts at school. Ethan stood by the window, staring out into the dark night with a tired but determined face. He knew that tonight was the hardest time in their lives. "Sometimes the world will try to bring you down in the cruelest ways," he said softly, his voice shaking with emotion. "But we have to stay strong. We can't let them win." Sarah lowered her head. "I'm scared, Dad. I'm scared our voices won't be enough. I'm scared we'll fail." Sophie held her sister's hand. "I'm scared too. But if we give up now, what's the point of everything we fought for?" Ethan walked over and hugged his daughters tightly. "You have more voices than you think. You have more heart and courage than you think." That night, they decided not to let the hate drown their dreams. Ethan proposed a bold idea, a video they would make themselves, featuring Sarah and Sophie singing in their attic. No big stage, no spotlight, just their voices and their honesty. The next few days were filled with simple but enthusiastic preparation. With Ethan's help, they reconfigured the attic to create a comfortable recording space. Cameras were set up, old microphones were set up, and small lights hung to create a warm atmosphere. When the recording began, all fears seemed to melt away. Sarah and Sophie sang again, their voices soft and powerful at the same time, filling the space with hope and courage. The video was then posted to social media with a short message from Ethan. Hear the hearts of two little girls who never gave up even when the world tried to silence them. The response? Amazing. Within hours, thousands of people had watched, shared, and left positive comments on their social media accounts. Support poured in from across the country, overpowering the wave of hatred that had once swept through. Sarah and Sophie began to see a new light, not just on their computer screens, but in their real lives. And what had initially been a night of hardship became the beginning of a new, hopeful journey. In the days after the attic footage was posted, Sarah and Sophie never expected the attention they would receive, not just from their peers, but from adults, the arts community, and even local and national media. Ethan's phone kept ringing with interview invitations and offers of help. The once cold and challenging Millfield School began to change slowly. Teachers who had once been indifferent began to pay more attention to their talented daughters. But the biggest change came from an unexpected invitation. One bright morning, Ethan received a call from a television producer in the big city of Cleveland. They were interested in inviting Sarah and Sophie to perform on a national music program, a rare opportunity for two young girls from humble backgrounds. That night in the attic, as they discussed the offer, Sarah hesitated. "Dad, do we have to go there? I'm scared I can't. Scared of being surrounded by people." Sophie squeezed her sister's hand. "I'm scared too. But this is our chance. We can't keep hiding here." Ethan nodded. "I know it's not easy. But this is a door of opportunity. You've come this far. It's time to show the world who you really are." Over the next few days, they prepared themselves seriously. Ethan arranged a practice schedule and accompanied them to a recording studio in Cleveland. Despite the pressure, Sarah and Sophie began to grow in confidence, realizing that their voices were not only a gift, but also a great responsibility. However, behind the glittering attention, they also learned that the entertainment world was full of challenges and temptations. A warm and friendly young manager approached them, offering promises of luxury and instant success. The sharp Ethan immediately sensed that something was wrong. He warned his daughter to stay alert. "Don't let them take advantage of you. You must stick to your principles and conscience," Ethan advised. Sarah and Sophie learned to choose who to trust and who was simply interested in the shine of their fame. The night before their television appearance, they sat backstage holding hands, feeling their hearts pounding. Sarah looked at Sophie. "I don't know what tomorrow will bring, but I do know one thing. I don't want us to change because of this." Sophie smiled. "Me too. We're still us. Our voices are still our voices." As the spotlights shone on them and the cameras began rolling, the world was ready to hear the voices of the twin girls from Millfield. Voices that were not only beautiful, but also full of courage and honesty. The long-awaited day finally arrived. The Cleveland morning sky was clear and cloudless, but Sarah, Sophie, and Ethan's hearts were filled with a wave of emotions, excitement, anxiety, and hope all mixed together. The grand television studio was filled with busy crews, huge spotlights and cameras ready to record every second. Sarah and Sophie walked down the backstage hallway, their hands clasped tightly, giving each other unspoken courage. When the host called their names and invited them to the stage, their hearts raced. The bright spotlights flooded them, and thousands of eyes were glued to them, both in the studio and watching from home. The music began to play, and Sarah and Sophie let out their voices. Not the voices of little girls who were scared, but voices full of power, hope, and honesty that silenced doubt. The audience fell silent. Some held their breath. Only their voices filled the room. When the song ended, thunderous applause and cheers erupted. Sarah and Sophie looked at each other, their eyes gleaming with happiness and relief. But soon, an unexpected challenge came. A show producer approached them with a record deal that promised instant fame. But behind his friendly smile, there was pressure to change their style and image, to make them entertainment commodities, not children with voices. Ethan stood firm, rejecting the offer, arguing that they should stay true to themselves and not rush into a harsh world. "These kids are not products," he said loudly. "They have a voice, and it's theirs, not anyone else's, to exploit." Sarah and Sophie were inspired by their father's courage. They knew they had a long way to go, and they had to tread carefully. That night, in their small home, Sarah looked up at the stars from her bedroom window and whispered, "I feel like we've weathered the storm, but the sky's not quite clear yet." Sophie nodded. "But we have each other and our voices. That's the most important thing." Ethan smiled from the doorway. "And I'll always be here watching over you." They know this is just the beginning, a long journey full of challenges but also full of hope. After Ethan's bold decision to turn down an offer that could potentially turn Sarah and Sophie into instant entertainment products, the atmosphere in their small home has changed for the better, though the challenges have not completely disappeared. The following days are filled with more focused rehearsals that focus on developing the girls' natural talents without the overwhelming pressures of the outside world. Ethan uses his time wisely, coaching Sarah and Sophie to maintain the integrity of their voices. Voices that come from the heart, not from fleeting ambition. Millfield School is beginning to show small but significant changes. Teachers are beginning to recognize Sarah and Sophie's courage and talent, while once dismissive friends are opening the door to friendship. One afternoon, as they are practicing in the attic, an elderly woman with a warm smile and eyes full of wisdom approaches. She is Mrs. Margaret, a retired music teacher who was once well known in the local community. "You have extraordinary voices," she says sincerely. "I've seen a lot of talent, but few with hearts as strong as yours." Mrs. Margaret offered to help them as a personal mentor, teaching them deeper singing techniques and how to keep their voices healthy and strong. Her presence brought new energy and greater hope. Ethan also began reaching out to local charities and arts communities to find ways for Sarah and Sophie to share their talents with more people. Not for fame, but for inspiration and empowerment. 1. Of the most touching moments came when Sarah and Sophie were invited to sing at their school's fundraiser. In the audience, their father stood proudly, watching his two daughters now sing not just for themselves, but to move the hearts of others. When their final song, a heartfelt medley of their own creation, came out beautifully, the room was silent, awestruck. Applause erupted, not out of force, but because the sound was genuine and full of love. That night, before bed, Sophie looked up at her sister with sparkling eyes. "We've been through the darkest darkness, Sarah. Now it's time for us to live in the light we've created." Sarah smiled and held Sophie's hand tightly. "We'll always be together no matter what." Ethan closed the door to their room with a heart full of gratitude. The simple dream they once held in the old attic was now growing into a real hope, a story of love, courage, and the undying power of conscience. Time goes by, and Sarah, Sophie, and Ethan's lives begin to find a new rhythm that is more stable and meaningful. Offers come and go, but this little family begins to learn to choose wisely, keeping their voices and hearts pure. Millfield School is no longer a cold and mocking place. Sarah and Sophie begin to make real friends, who admire their courage and warmth. They are also active in art and social activities, sharing their stories and songs as a source of inspiration. Mrs. Margaret, their mentor, continues to accompany them with great patience, honing their vocal techniques and introducing them to a variety of classical and contemporary music. Every day of practice feels like a small step towards a big dream full of hope. One day, Ethan receives news that a music foundation in Chicago is interested in giving Sarah and Sophie a scholarship to study more seriously there. This offer is a breath of fresh air, an opportunity they have been waiting for. Although full of pride, this decision is not without a dilemma. Ethan knows that this means they have to leave the small house and the life they have known. In the middle of the night, they sat together in the attic, where all dreams begin. Sarah stared out the window, the stars twinkling dimly. "Are we ready, Dad?" Ethan sighed, then smiled. "We always are. You two have voices that are not just meant to be heard, but to change the world." Sophie put her arm around her brother. No matter what happens, we're together. The day of departure arrived. Ethan packed several suitcases, bringing with him their mother's old cassette tapes as a reminder of their roots and their undying love. At the Chicago airport, they stepped through a new gate, opening a new chapter of challenges and opportunities. But this time, they weren't alone. They carried a voice that had won the hearts of so many, and a love that would be the foundation of their journey. As the plane took off, Ethan stared out the window with a surge of hope. "This is just the beginning," he murmured. Beyond the clouds, above the towering city, Sarah and Sophie looked at each other, smiling with confidence. They knew that the small voice from the old attic had now become a great song that would continue to inspire. Time passes and the seasons change in the bustling city of Chicago. Sarah and Sophie, now adapting to their new lives as scholarship students at a prestigious music school, hold all the memories of their small Millfield home close to their hearts. Their days are filled with intensive practice, small concerts, and meetings with new friends who also have high aspirations. However, in the midst of their busy lives, they never forget their roots and the original voices that have shaped their souls. Ethan, despite his busy work, always sends letters and audio recordings, reminding them that the love and support of family is their greatest strength. One warm afternoon in the school concert hall, Sarah and Sophie stand side by side on stage. They will perform in front of teachers, friends, and guests, performing a song they wrote together, a tribute to their mother and the long journey they have traveled. When the first note flows, the room falls silent, carried away by the beauty of the twin voices that shake the heart. When it was over, there was a standing ovation, not just for their talent, but for the courage and honesty that shone through every lyric and note. After the show, Ethan stood backstage, his eyes welling with tears. He knew their struggle was not over, but that voice, a voice born of love, hope, and courage, would live on, never to be extinguished. In the small attic of their old house, now empty, their mother's cassette tapes were still neatly stored. A lasting legacy that served as a reminder that even from the most humble of places, great voices can be born. Sarah looked at her sister and whispered, "We have conquered the world with our voices." Sophie smiled, "And our voices will always be there wherever we are." Ethan looked at them full of pride and hope. "Your voices are a light in the darkness. Keep singing, my children." Their story was a reminder that true voice comes not just from talent, but from a heart full of love and determination. And here, in the brilliance of their new world, that voice would continue to echo, never to be extinguished.